I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who is Dr. Brian Litt. So Dr. Litt is a professor of neurology, neurosurgery, and bioengineering at the University of Pennsylvania. So he divides his time equally between the schools of medicine and engineering and directs centers in neuroimaging, neuroengineering, epilepsy research, and device innovation. So he's a neurologist who treats patients with epilepsy, and his research focuses on neuroengineering and translates basic science to new diagnostic and therapeutic technologies with a focus on epilepsy and other brain network disorders. And he also leads the development of infrastructures and platforms for international data sharing and integration at scale. So Dr. Litt kindly accepted to talk to us today about challenges and opportunities in scaling translational research in epilepsy. So we're all very much looking forward to your talk, and the floor is yours, Dr. Litt.
All right, thank you so much. So 15 minutes, I'll start my timer and share my desktop. So your effort is incredibly exciting, and I think it's exactly what our field needs. So I'm going to share a few thoughts as both a clinician and a scientist, and see what you think. Maybe gives you some food for thought for discussion. So the things I think about, we spend a lot of our time working on technical, advancements to improve the lives of people with epilepsy. But here are the big challenges, I think. Ideally, we would like to be able to stratify our patients early and predict their outcome. We'd like to optimize their treatment and make it fast and cost-effective. One of the biggest challenges we have here at our center is we just don't have enough clinicians to see all the patients. So examples, patients with new onset seizures, how do we get them to optimal therapy? Who's going to get worse? Who's going to get better? Who's going to end up with a device or surgery, or who's going to end up cured? Refractory epilepsy, which is where a lot of us spend our time. These challenges about stratifying, predicting outcome, and optimizing therapy aren't unique to epilepsy. It's the same in all of neurology. And this is just an example, of all of the publications that were on networks in epilepsy published per year. You can see this incredible ramp up, 1,100 papers last year. And yet we're not using these things in standard clinical practice. I'm going to make the argument that our field stagnated. We've been doing the same things the same way for a long time, and patient outcome hasn't really improved, at least for refractory patients. So the question is, could data be the answer? And I'm going to say, and you, because, Nishanta told me that this group, although it has a number of sponsors who are very senior, is largely made up of young investigators, which is incredibly exciting. So take a look at this list of the kinds of data that are becoming available that are not typically leveraged for treatment right now. So the EMR, physiology and imaging, digitized now. I no longer have to go to the airport and pull a MRI scan out of the trunk of a neurosurgeon's car like I had to do once to take care of a patient. We're getting genetics information more and more for biobanking. We have the literature, and then there is going to be a flood of information coming out of continuous wearable devices and subcutaneous EEG monitors, because our patients don't often know when they have seizures. So even when we write down outcomes from our studies, it's not clear how accurate they really are. The question is, how do we handle it? How do we capitalize on it? And by the way, I've never actually seen somebody try to drink out of a fire hose. I thought that was kind of interesting. So here's an example. Many of you on this call have papers just like this. So this is one that came out of our group, where we wanted to be able to compare a new patient to the collective history in a large group of patients, not just how many I've seen personally, or the 30 we operate on, or the 150 we operate on a year at our center. And the idea is, take a database. We took our data and also from the MNI published data set, normal electrodes, made an atlas out of it, and then compared patients against this atlas to get Z-scores to figure out what should be operated on and what shouldn't be. And in some cases, it gave great results. And in other cases, like this is an example of a patient where one side was operated on, but the other side came out with an abnormal Z-score. Of course, this was retrospective. But the accuracy of this, we end up with ROC curves like in the 0.7 range. It's not good enough for clinical practice. And the question is why? And epilepsy is complicated. We always say it's heterogeneous, but even if we had a homogeneous population, we know that epileptogenesis continues after people have epilepsy. Maybe we've just seen them at different times. We're comparing people late stage to early stage changes, and we don't have enough data. This was a study that had 140 some patients in it. It's a small fraction of what we would need to do this accurately. This is just an example of how data can change our point of view. So this is a natural language processing study that Colin Ellis led here. 5,000 patients, each horizontal line is a patient. They're all smashed together, so you can't pull out individual patients very well. 12 years in the x-axis. These are stratified in terms of number of seizures. An orange dot means they had a seizure since the last visit. A blue dot says they haven't. This is unstructured data and validated algorithms that are virtually as good as humans reading the records. And what you see is, the literature says that 60% of patients are seizure-free, and it's certainly not the case in our hand, but this is a biased sample. This is the University of Pennsylvania. But what we see is that many patients kind of blink on and off. Some never have more seizures, like at the bottom. Some never are seizure-free. Some drop out, some die. And when we look at this just gives us an idea of how the reality when you look at large populations is very different than what we think clinically. So look at all these efforts. We're not the only people that have said large amounts of data should be used. I mean, your group is dedicated to this. This is a small sample of the number of data platforms that are available, many that have imaging, some that just have EEG, some that have both. How are we going to make sense out of this? How are we going to make sense out of an environment where people are rewarded for first or last authored publications or grants when it's really team science that needs to be done, like astronomy or genetics? So we made a proposal to try to put together an open source collaborative group that we'd love to interface with you, and we're calling it epilepsy.science. And the idea is to make hooks so that all of these data platforms can talk together. And the idea is exactly what you said in the introduction. We want to share data. We need to make an ecosystem, have tools, APIs. These are some of the things on the left that people need to share. I mentioned ways here because data sets that are put up and shared and given DOIs will be annotated, and the really good ones and useful ones will be used over and over again. And the other ones will kind of drop off in their data life cycle. We're proposing this S-index. If you all start, and we all start to credit people's data sets and publications, and then we can get Clarivate or somebody to list a ranking, our S-index for how many people have shared our data, maybe that will change incentives for people to share. I think publications and universities have to require people to share their data. But we can't let it be, we can't let it be run by for-profit entities like Elsevier and publishers and people like that. We have to have control of these things as academicians. So epilepsy.science, there's going to be a meeting that the NIH is going to sponsor in September. But we know that, the Europeans are way ahead in many ways. The MNI, many of you on the call have been doing this for a long time, but we need to kind of facilitate it and put together the links, the formats, the ways that people can find data, access it, and analyze together. This is not a technical problem. This is a political problem. So in terms of the amount of effort that it takes here in this inverted pyramid, the technical part you can see is small. We all could do this, but it's the process. Right now, we're trying to do this with Pensive for some grants that we have, and the agreements that individual universities and the barriers that they put up to sharing data can be huge, and it's highly variable. Some places want to sell it. Some places won't allow it because of privacy concerns. And so these rings on the right here, ethics, privacy, training, discoverability, how do we sustain this? Because there are costs. We need to have things open. So the data, you've seen this, they need to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And we need to put them together because our results will not get into clinical practice unless we can put them together. So here's some food for thought. I think that the epilepsy field is stagnant because of the outcomes, even though there's a lot of innovation, even though there were 1,100 papers on networks in epilepsy last year. We need to think about how we can disrupt things to make them usable. And an ROC of 0.7 for every study is not going to fly. So we need larger studies, longitudinal data. They need to be adjusted and annotated expertly. This is a huge problem. We're going to need automated tools for that. It would be ideal if we could have iterative imaging. I just gave an example here of a low field scanner. You know, this is operated with an iPad. It doesn't need a radiologist. It can go into an exam room. It costs very little. You know, could we use these and image every patient every time? I mean, it's disruptive. Maybe it's not practical. We can't do it with the tech that we have now. There are a number of us that have been pushing this idea of a scientific payload in every patient. Every patient that gets treated, every patient that gets data collected, every patient that has, like here, the subcutaneous EEG monitoring device, and there are many coming out, you know, those data need to be harvested for research. We need to have a way of doing that that doesn't overwhelm us with cost and difficulties. And there need to be new approaches to team science. I am so invigorated by seeing your group starting to see that you have this ability and people who are like-minded and many young investigators who want to share, who want to credit each other, to work for grants together and ways to push your careers forward. This is not an individual sport. This is a team sport. And then we need new interventions, new devices, models of care. I can tell you one of the things I'm super interested in is I want to turn epilepsy surgery into cardiac EP. I don't want to put electrodes in that are linear, that sample structures poorly, that sit in there for a week, that we get seizures, take them out, and 3 months later laser ablate partially where the problem is. Lesions don't obey anatomical boundaries. Resecting just the amygdala and the hippocampus might not be where the dysplasia is. But if we could stimulate, record, and ablate in the scanner in one procedure, that's an example of disruptive change. We need to think about different ways of doing this. If we're going to put a device in, we should localize electrophysiologically where it goes. Cardiology is 50 years ahead of us. You should take a look at that literature for imaging, mapping, mixing electrophysiology with functional imaging. So a number of us, this is an article that's ancient now. It's from 2016, where we held a meeting sponsored by the White House and a bunch of other organizations about building an open data ecosystem for neuroscience. This and other publications give some ideas, and I think your group, among others, could really rewrite these rules. So these are my grants. This is our team at Penn. There are a whole bunch of people, and I'm super excited to have some discussion. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Litt. That was a terrific talk. And
2 minutes early, 2 minutes early.
More time for discussion. So if there are like burning questions from the audience, please step up. Otherwise, I'm happy to. Oh, Sarah.
Yeah, I have a question, or maybe just a comment. I really like the idea of the epilepsy.science that you proposed. And I'm a big fan of big data set, big data in epilepsy neuroimaging. We've published a ton with enigma epilepsy. But I think as good as large amounts of data is, some people may think that curated smaller sample sizes may even be better. So is epilepsy science the way to sort of achieve both, or the best of both worlds, in that sense, where we will have access to large amounts of data that are curated and organized in a way that is consistent across research sites, research studies, and so on and so forth?
So, I mean, I think it's what we make of it, right? And so this is an idea that it's not like our thing. right? We want this to be a community thing. So the question is, how would you do it? I mean, I could think of ideas like one is catalog every single brain image done in somebody with epilepsy and be able to find it. Like I can find 5,000 patients with TLE, certain percentage of which, that have had brain images at different times. But then what percentage of them are curated? What percentage of them are annotated? What percentage of them were done in scanners that can be harmonized using applications that you have? I mean, so my own feeling is cast a broad net, but then we're going to need some kind of system that talks about, first gives attribution, second talks about quality. Like we've all seen crappy data. We know what that looks like, right? And what about the annotations? What about maybe the patient didn't really have epilepsy? Maybe they just passed out at a rock concert, right? So I don't know, what would you do? How would you do it?
It's a hard question because everybody has their own goals or aims that they want to achieve with the data sets that are available. So to me, there's no right answer to how to organize the data that will please everybody. But some sort of feedback loop where maybe I use the data, I use it in a way and record and document how I've organized it, what I've used, what I've found, maybe highlight a patient that has bad quality and feed that back into the data organization website could be one way to kind of address this issue.
So I think that's key. And that's what I meant when I said Waze, which is, if you use Waze to navigate, you see everybody annotates the traffic pattern and tells you where the blockages and the police are and stuff like that. And I think that's an excellent idea. There needs to be a way to annotate and talk about quality. Of course, you might disagree with Nishant. And so maybe we need to give people like ratings, give him like a 3 and give you like a 6.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And weight the scores. Sorry, Nishant.
No, that's fine. I think Vicky has a question.
Yeah, I was just going to weigh in on that same topic that I agree with, and I think it's great to put together something like epilepsy.science, but I also think that it's important though in that initiative to include the people like myself, we have the smaller but maybe more high quality in terms of more controlled data sets. And so sometimes we're intimidated to want to contribute to other ones because they're called big data. And so I think, oh, mine's not big. But there are a lot of us out here who have smaller but more annotated data sets. And we need to encourage, I think, those kinds of data sets to be added in to these and not just the major big players that have, the broader sweeping data sets.
Yeah, Vicky, I couldn't agree with you more. So just to be clear, like that fancy web page that I put up, I mean, that is slideware. That's like a placeholder. You can look it up and the links, might be some informatics. You're exactly the kind of person that needs to be a part of this. So this is an open invitation to the entire community, anybody who has interest. And I think that those kinds of, well-refined, annotated, thought out data sets, they're going to be worth their weight in gold. And you know what? You need to be rewarded for those. If people use it, I think it would be great to actually be able to see which data sets are used the most, right? I think there needs to be a way to keep track of that.
And Vicky, if I just add on to what Brian said, I think ultimately our goal is to annotate individual patients in each data set so that we can quickly find similar type of data across similar patients across different data sets. So even smaller data sets would be like individual patients would be annotated.
I'm very disappointed George Clooney just left, but Matthias showed up.
Yeah. It might be good on these websites to put that where people can maybe, have a data wanted page. I'm looking at doing this kind of study. Yeah. Does anyone have the data? Because I review papers and I see papers and I think, darn it, I could have given some data for this. They could have had more data. We have some like that. So maybe putting it out there. I mean, I know people don't want to give away their ideas and things, but usually, it's all good. And that maybe you say, hey, I'm looking, does anybody have XYZ? And then people can say, hey, we do. We want to collaborate.
That's perfect.
Yes.
That's a great
An
idea.
ecosystem is, right? Yeah.
That's a really great point, Vicky. One of the ideas of the new website and the discussion board, especially, which really hasn't kicked off as much as we would hope for by now, but it would be to just post these questions, these demands, these requests for data, and just have people chime in and say, hey, I've got data I can share. Do you want to collaborate? Send me an email. So if any of you want to do a project or are looking for data, feel free to post it on the discussion board. We'll share it on Twitter. We'll do our best to get the word out there. But please use the resources.
I think
Matthias, you have a
Yes.
question?
Yeah, George has his hand up there. Matthias, did you want to ask something?
Yeah, right. Yes, well, ask. We all agree, Brian, and it's a kind of you're preaching to the converted. Clearly, we all love you and the story you tell. But how do we reach out to these kind of, well, to the others, the neuropsychologists, the psychiatrists? So imaging on its own to
Were you trying to say that imaging alone doesn't give the full picture? I'll quote you with a pun, but I think that's right. We need to include those
build
other.
of the story.
Oh,
So-
sorry. You went out, Matthias. Say it again.
Yeah, no. Well, again, we talk about we're singing from the same tree. But how do you include them? How do you get across these territory kissing?
So, Vicky, maybe in response and what Sarah had said, I think that even though it's early, we should put like a suggestion site or a join or get on the notification list at this epilepsy.science stuff. And we should link it everywhere where people have interest. We want this to belong to you in the community. It's not something that belongs to us. We're just going to try to facilitate connecting people, and this new organization is perfect.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, for sure, we'll link the Epilepsy Science website as well on our website, so that way we can all stay connected.